I acknowledge to being the oldest by far, it looks like. My name is Marge Legaye. I'm Kevin Spencer's mother. His Krishna name is Das, and I've practiced law in Orange County longer than any of you have been alive, and enjoyed it thoroughly and still do. Kevin wanted me to talk about Prabhupada, or whoever asked Kevin to ask me, and also a little bit about my experiences with Krishna consciousness. So I'd like to start with that, if I may. I first learned about Krishna consciousness in 1969, I believe, in Laguna Beach, when the Laguna Temple started in a little house out in Laguna Canyon, a very modest place, with about 10 members. And Kevin's philosophy teacher got him interested, and then I thought I'd better find out a little bit about it too. So I became rather well acquainted with that group, and in 1970, my family took a trip on Kevin's high school graduation to Europe, and we lost him over there. In Paris, we went to a well-known restaurant in the Latin Quarter, and the devotees were all out in front singing and chanting. So when we ended our trip through Europe, as we had planned, he said he wanted to go back to Paris and stay there. And so we thought, well, okay. And we put him on the train in Zurich, wasn't it? And I didn't see him for a long time. I visited the Paris temple in the winter of '71, and that was an experience too. For those of you who know Paris, it was in the 14e arrondissement, which is way, way out from the center of town, and past the Montparnasse, and they lived in a little 2 or 3 story, it was on the second or third story apartment. As I recall, there were only 8 or 10 of them, led by Hari Vilas, who was from Chicago or Michigan. This was in Paris. And even with that small group, and clear back in 1971, they made their presence very well known. They went on Sankirtan all over the streets, and I went with them a few times, and sometimes they were well received, but I remember the slop bucket that was thrown on us from some house. And they also gave lectures and feasts at the American University in Paris. And so quite a few people became interested in that and came to the movement. After Kevin was in Paris, he went to India and was in Bombay for some period of time. And I happened to be in London at a bar association meeting, and I thought, well, that's real close to Bombay. I'll run over there. And so I visited him there, and that was extremely interesting. That was the summer of '71. That temple was headed by Madhuvisa, and not more than 10 people, maybe 10 or 12. And they lived in an apartment a good ways out from the center of town, but it was very interesting. The Pakistani embassy was on one floor, and they occupied a floor, and Ravi Shankar, the sitarist, lived on another floor. So it was kind of an interesting building. Again, that was early in the movement, but they were very well received because it was at a time when the Indian youth were straying away from their religious beliefs, and the parents were very upset about it. And so here were these American youths following their principles. So they invited them to speak and come to their homes to show an example of American youth. I don't remember any women in the group in Paris, but there were several women in Bombay. Tulsi, I remember, a small girl, and I don't remember that there was any difference in participation between the men and the women. I remember that Tulsi was a particularly dedicated and hard-working devotee, and there were some others in there too, but she's the one I remember personally. In the early 70s, I represented the Laguna chapter, or individuals in it. Seems to me Steve was one of them at one time, weren't you? Who got arrested for various things, various egregious crimes like chanting on the sidewalk and being on the beach and so forth. And I remember one young girl who was arrested for just such an egregious crime and kept overnight in jail and given a body search for chanting on the sidewalk. And I went before the city council several times. They were not well received at that time. It was a hard job. And I guess as a result of doing some of that, I became acquainted with Karanda, head of the LA temple. And I had a number of conversations with him, and he asked me if I would help Prabhupada with the book trust. And I said to the extent that I was capable, I would. And so he sent me a draft of the proposed trust prepared by an attorney in India, and then gave me verbally some of the ideas that Prabhupada wanted to incorporate in it. So I prepared a draft of the Bhaktivedanta book trust and sent it to Karanda to propose to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada came back with a number of questions and then invited me up. And so I think we went up within a few days in July of 71. And I had the honor to meet with Prabhupada privately and personally. When I say private, I'm quite sure Karanda was there. But it was very informal and very pleasant and very easy. There was no arrogance or ostentation about him whatsoever. And we didn't sit at an office austerely across from one another, but we sat in a back chamber and talked in a very congenial, personal manner. I asked him if he knew my son, Shrutidas, and he said, "Isn't that the young brahmachari in Bombay?" I said, "Yes, that's him." And actually, I met with Prabhupada before I made that trip to Bombay, so I was sort of big stuff when I got there, to Bombay, and announced who I had just been with. And, so I prepared the book trust for him, and he had a number of things he wanted included. He was very clear. He had a lot of confidence in his trustees, which included Karanda and Shima Sundar. I don't know, I'm sure the London lady will know those people. Huh? Oh, to whom? Oh, well, I guess that scratches my next 4 paragraphs. Now, I enjoyed them very much, and Prabhupada had a great deal of confidence in their discretion, and he emphasized that he wanted them. I kept asking, do you want these limitations and these restrictions, and he did not. He had a lot of confidence in those trustees, and he wanted them to have the discretion, but he was very clear that the book trust should be handled as a separate entity, that the proceeds go 50% to the book fund, which would generate new books and printing and everything that had to do with the publications. I should say, you probably all know anyway, that at that point he assigned all his publications, all his writings and copyrights to the trust. And 50% of the proceeds then were to go to the book fund and 50% to the building fund to be used for acquisition of new properties and improvement of properties for temples all over the world. And then, curiously enough, he asked, I have notes that he had, when I was visiting him, that he asked me to incorporate a provision that in the discretion of the trustees, they could make donations to other charitable contributions, whatever, having nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. And so that was hopefully the beginning of that. I was very privileged and honored to have met with him, but his demeanor with me was so easy and warm and friendly and personal that it didn't seem like a big job at all. He made me very comfortable from the outset. I think I'm becoming inelegant, which means not short and not sweet. See if I had anything. One last comment on my travels. I visited Kevin in South Africa when there were just Rishi Kumar and Shuddhidas were there. And as I recall, Prabhupada had given them a large supply of books for distribution in Durban and Johannesburg. And they were the only two devotees with this pile of books. And they were very well received there, too, by the Indians. There was, when we flew into, my husband and I flew into Durban, there were several very prominent businessmen there to meet us, and it stayed in my mind for a long time because apartheid was much in evidence in those days. And so these very, very fine-looking people accompanied us to our hotel, and we invited them in, and of course they couldn't come in because apartheid applied to Indians as well as to blacks and any minorities. And so my husband at that time, who was quite a gagster, changed our room wherever it was and put it up where the suites were up near the top and took them around to the back elevator, and we smuggled them in. And they came up, and they were delightful people. And I think that you met with some of them, didn't you, on a trip over there? Some of those people are since very much involved in the new temples that have been built there. Then after Rishi Kumar left, Kevin stayed on and sold the whole package before he came home. That's right, you were. That's right. Which is a compliment from that country. I'd just like to comment that I think the changes in the movement are so dramatic and so significant and so meaningful since those days that I've been telling you about. I think my objection in those days was the cloistered manner in which they were living and the isolation from society, and I didn't like that. I found that very difficult, and I think there was a great deal of opposition from people in general who never took the time to find out what was going on, and now today you all still retain the same values and apply them, but you apply them in every aspect of society, business and social, and I think that's extremely meaningful for your movement as well as productive for society in general. I think I've cut somebody's speech down short. Thank you.